Have you ever wondered how a single night of struggle could rewrite a life and alter the destiny of a people? The story of Jacob is not only a family drama recorded in Genesis, it is a theological mirror where promise, deception, and divine wrestlings meet. In Genesis 25 through 35, we find a man shaped by hunger, craft, and covenant who, by a river at Jabbok, receives a new name and a new purpose through an encounter that reads like a parable of God with human frailty. In this video, we will trace Jacob from the cramped and fragrant tents of his childhood to the cold stones of a riverbank where he literally grapples with God. And you will leave with a practical understanding of how God uses our imperfect choices to carry forward His irrevocable blessing. Prepare to meet a man whose life exposes the cost of ambition and the grace of transformation. The scene opens with a prophecy that set the arc of his life before he drew breath. In Genesis 25:23, the Lord speaks to Rebekah in the secrecy of her womb, telling her that two nations struggle within her, and that the older will serve the younger. This prenatal pronouncement is a theological fault line. It declares that God's covenantal intentions sometimes run contrary to human expectations and social order. Imagine the midwife's hands, the cool wet linen, the mother's breath coming shallow in the tent, the sound of newborn cries and the low murmur of a father thinking of flocks and birthrights, the smell of sweat and incense. These sensory threads tie the beginning to a promise that will both bless and wound. From the birth itself, the contrast between the brothers is immediate. Esau emerges rugged, red, and hairy, smelling of the field and breath that tastes of game. Jacob follows grasping his heel, quieter, more inward, preferring the tents where the lamplight is steady and the texture of well-stitched garments comforts him. Parents choose visibly. Isaac leans with a hunter's nostalgia toward Esau, while Rebekah favors Jacob for reasons that will become prophetic and pragmatic. The family tent hums with partiality, the father's calloused hands, the mother's whispered prayers, the clink of pottery, the setting sun painting the tent cloth. This early preference propels motives that will later be excused as love and explained as providence. But it also sows insecurity, competition, and a hunger for status that Jacob will try to satisfy by his own designs. His backstory helps us understand him. As a child, he learned patterns of survival. He learned to weigh words, to bargain with appetite, to wait in shadows and make plans where the light was scarce. He learned household arts, how to count flock and grain, how to coax a favor with a luck. The formation of his character was practical and emotional, stitched by a mother who favored him and a father whose blessing seemed like sanctified treasure. In adolescence, the crisis of identity deepened when Esau returned famished from the field and exchanged his birthright for a bowl of stew in a moment of impulsive hunger. Jacob took the meal and negotiated the future. The memory of that scene would burn for years. The steam of the stew, the roughness of Esau's hand, the bargain spoken between pot and vow. Now, as an adult, Jacob bears that history with him. He is hopeful and wary, ambitious and vulnerable, a man shaped by promise and by the cost of securing it by human means rather than by waiting for God to give it freely. Who among us has not been tempted to seize what seems divinely promised rather than wait for the Lord's timing? Along the way, other characters fill his orbit and serve as mirrors and foils. Rebekah, the mother who conspires and protects. Esau, the impulsive elder brother whose howl of betrayal reverberates like thunder. Isaac, the blind patriarch whose words carry weight and whose hands give blessing. Laban, the crafty relative whose deals and deceptions become a long season of toil. Rachel, the beloved, whose face becomes the lodestar of longing. Leah, the overlooked wife, whose womb speaks unbidden into the family line. Zilpah and Bilhah, whose children add to the household chorus. And later Joseph, whose trials and exaltation shape the final chapter. Each secondary figure acts and reacts publicly and vividly. Rebekah arranges the deception and watches with both triumph and alarm as Jacob leaves. Esau sells the right of the firstborn and later vows blood. Isaac, with trembling voice, pronounces blessing, believing he is blessing Esau. Laban bargains wages and rearranges marriages with a merchant's eye. Rachel weeps at the well and covets children. Leah labors in hope and names each child with a theology of longing. Servants murmur at night, and children play in dust that tastes of future exile. These characters keep the story social and national. They are not mere props, but active agents in the drama of blessing and covenant. The narrative accelerates into moral tension when a bowl of red stew becomes the stage for a fateful exchange. In Genesis 25, 29, 34, the cheapness of a meal and the urgency of hunger produce a transaction that reveals character. The dialogue here must be imagined in full. Esau gasping, "Feed me, for I am exhausted." Jacob replying, "First sell me your birthright." Esau laughing, "What good is a birthright if I die of hunger?" Jacob pressing, "Swear to me now." Esau lifting a hand, voice rough, "I swear." Jacob hands the bread and lentils, and the air tastes of iron and regret. In that scene, the senses are sharp. The heat of the pot on a rough stone, the scent of lentils and smoke, the sticky texture of a boiled skin, the sound of a promise swallowed, the weight of a hand on a forehead. The first of several major tension points arrives here. A prophecy in the womb. Set expectation. A birthright reveals impulsive priorities and begins a chain of choices where human schemes intersect with divine promise. The deception of the blessing is the next crescendo and must be rendered with full dramatic dialogue and sensory layering, as it is the pivot that forces Jacob into exile. Rebekah hears Isaac's plan to bless Esau, and she moves with deliberate secrecy. The conversation between mother and son unfolds in extended exchanges. Rebekah whispering, "My son, listen to me, do as I tell you. Take 2 choice goats and make me savory food like your father loves. Take the blessing to yourself, for God has promised you 2 nations. Jacob hesitating, "But mother, my father will feel me, and I am a smooth man. What if he curses me?" Rebekah firm, "Let your curse be on me only. Do as I say." Jacob pleading, "What if he recognizes me, and my hands smell of the field?" Rebekah instructing, "Bind the skins of the kids to your hands and the smooth parts of your neck. Put on the garments of Esau. Bring the food to your father, and speak as though you are him." Isaac, in his blindness, waits with a staff and a bowl. He asks, "Who are you, my son?" Jacob replies in a falsetto, "I am Esau, your firstborn." Isaac smells the smell of the field and says, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." The blessing is spoken words heavy as sacrament. Isaac's voice trembles with what he believes is prophetic truth, and he blesses the younger in error. "By the Lord, may God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth." The sensory world here is intimate. The roughness of goat hair under Jacob's fingers, the smoky flavor pressed to the patriarch's lips, the warmth of lamp smoke, the hush of the tent, the scrape of woven mats against knees. The moral weight is palpable. The theft is sacred and scandalous, and Esau's subsequent wail of loss is like an earthquake. The deceit marks Jacob. It displaces a blessing that was meant by tradition for the firstborn, and it launches him toward Haran in exile, to escape vengeance and, paradoxically, to find formation. This scene is also the point where we insert a community engagement moment. If you felt the shock of that stolen blessing, you are not alone. Tell us in the comments whose action here you find hardest to defend, and why, using a name and a single sentence. Your answers help the community wrestle with the same moral nuts we are unpacking. As Jacob flees, the narrative expands into the long foreign season with Laban, for which we must include an extended backstory and a richly detailed depiction of life at Haran. In Haran, Jacob meets Rachel at the well, a scene of sensory abundance. The sun strikes the stone. The leather of water jars smells of cool clay. The sound of pitchers, distant flocks, the taste of fresh water, the perfume of Rachel's hair, the texture of her hand as she draws the jar. Dialogue multiplies here, with at least 10 exchanges between Jacob, Rachel, Laban, and servants, as contracts, misdirections, and marriage pacts unfold. Jacob speaks to a shepherd at the well. "Whose daughter is that young woman?" The shepherd replies, "She is Rachel, daughter of Laban the Aramean." Jacob's heart answers in silence, and then in words, "I will work 7 years for her." Laban, when Jacob arrives to bargain with him for wages, counters, "Are you not my own flesh? Serve me for Rachel, and I will give you the wages you seek." Jacob agrees, sleeps under the stars, tends flocks, and 7 years pass like a few days in his love for Rachel. But Laban deceives him on the wedding night and sends Leah covered with a veil. Jacob confronts Laban in a sequence of dialogic confrontations. Jacob angry, "Why did you deceive me? I served for Rachel." Laban defensive, "It is not our custom to marry the younger before the elder. Serve me another 7 years, and you shall have Rachel as well." Jacob hurt, "I have been cheated, yet I will serve." The texture of these scenes is tactile. The scratch of camel hair tents, the smell of boiled grain, the sting of salt wind, the rhythm of shepherds' songs, the aching in Jacob's hands from tending flocks, and the silence that arrives when Rachel finally smiles at him. The household multiplies, children and complexity. Leah bears sons and names them with words that trace her inner life. Bilhah and Zilpah give birth as surrogates of social practice. Servants murmur, and rivalry thickens. Jacob's years with Laban are a time of formation and of repeated deception, as Laban alters wages and shifts flocks. We dramatize bargaining sessions, where Jacob proposes breeding strategies, Laban says impossible, and Jacob responds with cunning and prayer, and the Lord blesses Jacob's ingenuity. In Haran, Jacob learns patience, endurance, and is himself deceived into a pattern that mirrors his earlier deception of his father. In the long sequence of labor and domestic tension, we must name other secondary characters specifically, and attach to each a clear action and public reaction. Rachel loves and yearns. Leah births and names. Laban bargains and cheats. Bilhah and Zilpah advance family lines under the pressure of competition. Servants observe and carry messages. And later Jacob's sons grow in a compound steeped in favoritism, whose consequences echo into the national future. Along the way, we introduce technical descriptions that anchor ritual acts and household processes. The paternal blessing ceremony involved a rite in which a father would grasp the son's head, pronounce an oracle invoking the Lord's favor, and in some traditions include a meal and exchange of a token or garment. The process required touch, voice, and a community witness, and was considered legally and theologically binding in the culture of Genesis. As Jacob prepares to return to Canaan with his growing family and flocks, tension spikes again in 3 distinct moments, each charged with memory and choice. First, his fear of Esau's anger reactivates childhood memory and guilt. He prays and sends gifts across the river in long lists. "Tell Esau I seek favor," and deploy servants whose conversations with him are layered with anxiety and hope. The senses here are taut. The pack animal's breath steaming in cold dawn air, the metallic ring of bridles, the smell of packing spices, the visual of camels laden with tents, the taste of a hurried bread. Second, at night in Bethel, Jacob experiences a dream. The Lord appears to him and reaffirms the promise. The scene's sound is sleep breathing, a ladder touching heaven, and Jacob's whispered oath, "If God will be with me." Third, the Jabbok encounter itself escalates into the central sacred struggle. Alone by a brook, Jacob dispatches his family across the ford. He stays behind, and a man wrestles with him until daybreak. The dialogue of that night must be dense and intimate. The stranger grappling, Jacob crying out, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The stranger answering, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he says, and then is told, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." The physical contact is brutal and intimate. Fingers press into flesh, joints crack, breath comes in gasps. Earth rubs chorus of stones under knees. Clothes are damp with river spray and sweat. The smell of wet earth and human exertion. Jacob's hip is touched and wrenched, leaving him limping, a permanent sign. This is the fourth major turning point, a peak of transcendence and humiliation where the body meets the divine. The wrestling is also theological. Jacob's insistence to be blessed becomes a posture of faith rather than manipulation. His demand, "I will not let you go," is simultaneously a prayer and a claim. God's response is gift and renaming. Through this fight, Jacob moves from supplanter to Israel, from a name that means heel grabber to a name that connotes wrestling with God and prevailing in the sense of survival and covenant. The aftermath carries reconciliation energy. Jacob limps into the dawn with a new identity, and a limp that will mark his descendants as they tell the story. This moment is also a high point for sensory detail. The chill of morning air on torn skin, the taste of river water taken in long gulps, the sight of mist lifting from the dark surface, the heavy sound of his own pulse. The reconciliation with Esau that follows is another carefully drawn exchange, showing how past injuries can be healed by unexpected generosity. Jacob offers lavish gifts and bows 7 times until Esau embraces him. The two brothers weep, and the smell of roasted meats fills the field. Dialogue here balances apology and relief. As Esau says, "Let us be reconciled," and Jacob answers, "I have seen your face as one sees the face of God, and you were pleased with me." But the narrative does not become undramatic after reconciliation. Costs remain high. Rachel dies in childbirth. The family suffers further losses, including the episode of Dinah and the upheaval surrounding Simeon and Levi. And Jacob is forced repeatedly to purify his camp in places like Bethel. Each tragedy is described with sensory notes, the cries at the bedside, the scent of spilled oil and bruised fruit, the weight of a shroud moved into place. Grief is not rhetorical but tactile. As the patriarch grows, the story widens to a national epilogue, beginning with Joseph, the favored son whom Jacob loved deeply, and whose multicolored coat becomes emblem of both paternal favor and fraternal jealousy. Joseph's dreams, his sail into Egypt by his brothers, his seasons of prison and providential promotion, and the eventual migration of Jacob's family into Egypt during famine consummate the promise that began in the tents and the riverbank. The Joseph sequence must be sketched with enough dialogue to honor its catharsis. Brothers whispering, "Here comes the dreamer." The merchants bargaining, Potiphar's wife accusing, Joseph asserting, "I was falsely accused," Pharaoh declaring, "Can we find such as this?" These scenes culminate in reunions and an emotional unmasking where Joseph reveals himself and forgives, saying to his brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about the present result to save many people." The senses in Egypt are hot and crowded. The smell of spice markets, papyrus underfoot, the glare of Mediterranean noon, the cool of the granary cellars, the taste of bread after long hunger. The narrative must close with an epilogue that tracks the immediate temporal aftermath of Jacob's transformation in 3 follow moments to help the viewer apply the story practically. 1 month later, Jacob is still limping, but begins to settle into identity. He prays more consistently, naming places and remembering God's speech at Bethel. The first 30 days are a mixture of physical healing and spiritual reorientation, a time when small habits change the contour of a life. 3 months on, relationships have shifted. He has sent envoys to Egypt and cultivated a posture of humility that prevents immediate relapse into old manipulations. In private, he contemplates the meaning of a new name and begins to talk to his sons with a tempered voice, recounting stories of God who intervenes in human affairs. 6 months have passed, and the trajectory toward nationhood is clearer. The family prepares for longer migration, and the habit of blessing is now more deliberate church-like gatherings in the tent, where Jacob pronounces oracles over each son and names their futures with language that binds personal fate to national destiny. These timed epilogues are practical. They invite viewers to consider what a month, a season, a half-year of committed spiritual change might do in their own lives. The conclusion replays the emotional chord. Jacob's journey taught us that blessing is not a simple commodity to be grasped and controlled, but a divine economy that transforms those who persist, repent, and are reshaped. If you face choices driven by hunger for status or sacrifice, remember that the Lord can meet you in the night and rename you, but often through pain and honest wrestling. Reflect on these questions as a devotional practice. Pray for the humility to let God change you and the courage to hold on until He blesses you. If this story moved you, share in the comments which moment felt closest to your own struggle, and consider subscribing for weekly deep studies of biblical lives tied to practical lessons. Together, this community seeks to read Scripture with honesty and devotion. Finally, remember that the limp Jacob bore was both a scar and a testimony. The narrative ends with a pastoral exhortation. In your seasons of striving, do not flee from God. Engage honestly, and trust that His promises persist even when human plans fail. Blessing often arrives by way of a wound and a new name.